we'll have to see how it goes. So this is MVVM and Blazor with the Microsoft Community Toolkit. I'm Kelly Adam. Been with Intelitech 10.5 years now. Blimey. I need to find a new job. Blazor is really enabling us to write C# both on the client and on the server. And we can forget all the bad memories about JavaScript and TypeScript and all that stuff. How many folks here have ever heard MVVM or model view ViewModel as a pattern? Oh, lots of hands. Awesome. That is great. Good. Because I can't really afford the time to explain all the ins and outs of MVVM and why you want to use it. So we will blast forward with slide. This is just briefly to talk about why we would want to use MVVM in Blazor. Definitely to reduce the risk of our models and our business logic being changed by our application. And now we've suddenly made it that everybody can get approved for $1 billion of credit or, whatever bad outcome could be. So in this scenario, the view model is kind of an adapter between your business or domain model and the view itself. And so it prevents you from forcing those view changes down into your business life. Number 2, testability. I mean, we saw Mark's wonderful talk where he was using live unit testing to show new C# 11 features. We all like unit testing because it keeps the project manager off our back for stupid bugs and typos and things like that. So MVVM enables us to have more testable code. Thirdly, the agnosticism of the UI platform. So I've worked on a couple different projects using MVVM, both on thin clients, phones, mobile stuff, and thick clients like Windows Desktop. And you can get better than 90% code reuse if you're really strict with your MVVM. So that means we can take our Blazor app and port it to Xamarin Forms and generate some phone apps if we want. Or we could just run Blazor in a hybrid MAUI app and be done with it. But that talk, I think, was downstairs earlier. Fourthly, collaboration. I don't really see any designer-looking people here. No long ponytails, though. And so we're not the best UX designers. As code monkeys, we tend to like lots of buttons and lots of doodads and give me a sea of radio buttons for all the settings. Don't hide anything from me. But that's not really the best user experience for like my mother-in-law. And so this enables us to work with folks whose domain knowledge is more about the UI and user experience. And they don't need to understand how the data gets there. They can just do what they do best, and we wire up to it, and it provides a way for us to collaborate without conflict, I guess is a good way to say it. So, slides are cool, but let's look at some code. So, just some quick things. This talk is currently up in the Intelitech samples repo on GitHub under Blazor MVVM. The way I structured the talk is I kind of have big leaps from file to project to getting it working to doing messaging and then doing validation. Each of those is a branch. They sort of correspond to the different pages in my slide deck. The slide deck I think I checked into. So the final code is on the main branch, but you can go through the branches to do a more incremental step. So file new project, what we have here is basically the output from .NET new Blazor WASM. And that gives you a Blazor site with a Blazor server with a ASP.NET app host, and then a shared project for DTOs or POCOs or things that you would send from the server to the client. So that's all this is. And then we get, without doing the empty version, we get a counter page. We get, well, here, let's just look at what it looks like. We get a counter page, we get the weather report, and then we get an index and a layout with navigation. Loading. So here's our counter page. This is just showing Blazor having statefulness. This is Blazor doing an API call to that backend that was generated and pulling some data. So there's nothing, I haven't actually done anything here except had a test project because tests are good. Although I don't actually have a test here, it's just empty because file new project. So let's jump forward to adding the toolkit to this. Oh, it probably won't work while it's running though. Can't change the motor while the car is on. So a bunch of NuGet things happened in the background, because really the only changes that I've done here are to add in references to the Community Toolkit.mvvm, which is it used to be a open source project, and then Microsoft kind of took it over, and they called it the Microsoft Community Toolkit, and now it's just the Community Toolkit, because I guess they wanted to kind of remove their name from it. Now, unfortunately, you'll see I'm pointed at version 8.0 because that was current yesterday. They've since released version 8.1 last night, and I didn't want to change all my stuff for fear of it breaking. But the good thing is, looking at the release notes, they have fixed some of the things that I ran into as difficulties in wiring up Blazor to their agnostic MVVM setup. So what this really provides for us is observable objects and properties. It provides a way to send commands to things, which is a big part of MVVM. And it provides a message bus for components to be able to talk together on the background. So that's basically all that changed here, I believe. Just to make sure, let me check. Oh no, I did wire some stuff here too. So we need a few components in our Blazor project to make this work. We need some sort of base class for our ViewModels, and so I just have an interface here that extends notify property changed, which is how observable things work. And then I've got an abstract base that uses the MVVM class observable object. So that's a class that's provided to us that says, oh, I must have observable properties. I'll provide methods in CodeGen to make all that work. And you'll notice here, I've already got my first command, which is CodeGen from this attribute that comes from the MVVM toolkit. So, and of course it doesn't do anything except return a completed task right now. Because it is virtual, we will be using that in our base classes later. So that's sort of the starting point for ViewModels using this. The key takeaways are, it's got an interface because I'm going to rely on dependency injection to inject my ViewModels into my views for me, so that I don't have to tightly couple that at all. And I need to assume some behavior about those ViewModels, that they know about observables and that they can accept commands and do things like that. So I also need a base class for components, for Razor components, pages, stuff like that, that extends the Microsoft component base, but also has a generic property for what type of view model that it gets, and then has a property that gets injected through dependency injection. So it has a reference to the view model. And that's really all. Oh, here's a drain. Perfect. I told you guys to wait. So that the idea is that the view can be aware of the view model in knowing what properties it has, but the view model shouldn't know anything about the view. And in doing it this way, I'm able to keep all of these pesky Microsoft.ASP.NET Core out of my view model base. So I don't have to have a hidden dependency to whatever framework. So these view models should still work for any other C# project that will do MVVM. So Prism on WPF, or MVVM Lite, or Xamarin Forms on Android or iOS, or something like that. Other interesting things about the component is that I need a way, because I know that my view models are observable, when they change, I need to tell Blazor, re-render the page or re-render the component, because, stuff is different now. And the way to wire that up is to grab the property changed event on my view model and then call state as changed on the Blazor object, which just says, re-render yourself and anybody who's your child. I've also got a delegate so that I can pass through the Blazor uninitialized async. I can pass that through to my view model, because my view model needs to know when it's loaded. And the way I'm handling that is down in the base, I'm catching I'm catching that event and then reissuing it as a loaded command, so that I just have to receive the loaded command in any of my other view models, and they'll know when they've been called into service, so to speak. So, as far as changes there, one other change is that it generated that weather forecast object for us when we did file new project, but it was just a dumb class with properties on it. I want it to be observable properties, and the MVVM toolkit gives us a clever way to do that, where I define the things that I want as properties as private fields, and then I stick an attribute on there, and I make my class partial. And then it uses the new Roslyn codegen to go and generate the rest of this. So, for example, if I go look at the definition of this property, you'll see this is generated code, and it won't let me change it. And so this is generating your standard iNotify property change pattern, where it fires some events before it changes, and then finally sets the value of the backing field, and then fires events saying it's done changing. And we can wire validation to that too, and we'll get there shortly. So this is kind of the first table stakes that you need to be able to wire up Blazor to MVVM. You need some sort of component base, you need a view model, you need a way to inject it. Oh, and I suppose that's the third thing here. Oh, I'm not actually doing injection yet because all I have is an abstract class. Probably not going to actually end up injecting that anywhere. So, let's move on to, okay, so we've already done the wire up to the community stuff. Let's move on to creating our first component that uses that fetch data, get me a weather report example that comes in the built-in object, or the built-in solution. And I could demo this, but there's actually nothing interesting happening on the client yet, so it wouldn't look like much. componentize fetch data. Let that go true way. There we go. So, okay, we did this one in the last branch. So now we have our first component. And maybe it'll make more sense to show before and after on this. So the generated file that comes from the .NET new Blazor WASM template, it's got a bunch of code behind where they're doing the web call to get the data from the backend API. That's kind of a big no-no in MVVM. You never want your view to be that smart. It should just take care of how things look. It shouldn't be going and getting data. So I've gotten rid of the entire code block, which incidentally also makes it a heck of a lot more testable, because if I wanted to write a unit test and pass in a mock HTTP client, good luck. You could use it with VUnit maybe, but it's still pretty gnarly and not much fun. So I took that code and I put that down in the ViewModel. So now in our ViewModel, we've got brand new fetch data ViewModel. And this is where I have my first override of that loaded command. So this guy gets called by the Blazor on initialized AC event, I think. That fires off a command that says all the view models need to handle being loaded. And that's where I go and make a call to my HTTP client to get that data off the back end. One other thing I'm using here, which is actually not part of the MVVM toolkit, is an observable collection. This doesn't strictly have to be an observable collection because this is a read-only endpoint. I can't create a new forecast and send it back. That would be kind of cool. I'd like to make it warmer. And that's why you would want to use an observable collection. I could have just done an array or a list. Doesn't matter in this case because it is a immutable collection to me. So that guy goes and gets the data, and then now this guy changes to wire up to those ViewModel properties. Remember, our component base now has a ViewModel property on it, and so I can just go and test and see are there any weather forecasts. If so, loop through each of them and bind them to a table row inside of my table here. And so the way this works, launchy. Go to fetch data. I don't know, it's kind of quick. It did say loading there for a couple milliseconds, but because it's local, it's hard to, you blink and you miss it. We could make that a little slower. If we go down into our weather forecast controller and do the worst thing ever, don't tell Kevin. Is this milliseconds or seconds? Oh, it's milliseconds. You could simulate a slower. Yeah. So, restart. Yeah, and then I've got pulling the Wi-Fi card out. That's why. There we go. So there you can see it transition states, which shows that it's getting those property changed events from the ViewModel and realizing that it needs to re-render when the ViewModel starts collecting changes. In the case getting the weather report. Let's see. I feel like I'm missing something on there. Other than, I'm glad it's all CodeGen, because writing all of those observable classes by hand with, I notify property changed is no fun. Similarly with the commanding pattern. So that's kind of the hello world level example of MVVM. Let's go to the next step. I want more. So let's do some messaging. Oh yeah, because I made changes and I'm switching branches. We'll just keep them and have it be slow.
Is this the box? He has a study that you have.
No. There's no signal R here. And there's no cascading parameters or anything like that. I mean, one of the common problems I bump my head in with Blazor is that I've been very diligent and made a lot of subcomponents, and I have this subcomponent that's 6 levels deep, and he needs to raise a callback on some other subcomponent that's 9 levels deep. How do I do that? I guess I raise the callback all the way up to the top and let him fire off a new event all the way down the other chain. And that's really a pain in the neck, and I do it differently every time. So it's hard for somebody coming by me to maintain it, because they're like, oh, is this the Tuesday Kelly or the Thursday Kelly pattern? Did he have a good night's sleep or not? And what the MVVM toolkit gives us is both a strong reference or a weak reference messenger that acts just like the message bump in Windows or, hits your OS here. And we can take all of that load off of Blazor and handle it ourselves. So the way this works is I need to make a couple message types. And since these are essentially event args, I can use records because they will be immutable. Hopefully the messages won't change during transit. This will prevent the mail from being tampered with. And then inside my model here, test. So just to step back real quickly, this was the test of that first fetch data that just instantiates my ViewModel and then injects a mock HTTP client and verify that it does what I expect. And so I can verify that my ViewModel is now handling those requests and not the view. And I don't even have to call methods on my ViewModel. I can just send it a command to cause it to do stuff. But we want to do a similar thing with our fetch, our messaging in between two components. So what I've got here is a page with yield, bootstrap, row, and column with two components on it, one for entering ASCII text and one for entering hexadecimal. And I want the text one to send the value to the hex guy and translate it to hex, and I want the hex one to send the value back to the ASCII one and translate it back to ASCII. That might be a little confusing. I'll show you what it looks like. So, two big text boxes. Text. What does that look like in hex? So, okay, hex, that's pretty cool. What if I monkey with the hex and send it back? Oh, we get Unicode. So, this is what I'm talking about. The one component only knows about ASCII, and then he sends a message when it needs to change in the hex component, and vice versa. So the way I wired that up is not through dependency properties or any of that stuff. You can see none of these guys actually have any Razor parameters on them at all. All of that is done through the message bus that comes with the MVVM toolkit, which on the outside sort of feels like, how does this even work in the browser? Because, you know, we're writing all this C# stuff and we're running it on a browser in, you know, WebAssembly. How does that even work? It does. I don't know. It's magic. It might as well be magic. So what I've added here is some Blazor components, which are essentially the same as Blazor pages, that also have ViewModels in them and are binding properties of those ViewModels to some properties, to some stuff on the screen. So my text area gets bound to the hex text property of the ViewModel, and then my button is sending a command to the ViewModel saying, hey, send an ASCII converter message to the other guy. So what do those ViewModels look like? So right now we're looking at hex entry. Let's look at the hex entry ViewModel. So here's the method that accepts that command, the send to ASCII converter, that the button is wiring up to. And I already have a reference to the messenger, and that is because I've created a new ViewModel base class here. In addition to just plain old observable objects, the MVVM toolkit has the concept of an observable recipient, which is a thing with observable properties that also cares about messages of certain types. And so I sort of create those together by saying my base class for these ViewModels accepts a message type and then inherits from his observable recipient and is a recipient of that message type. And so really all that means is that I have to implement a receive method, and I could do these as async as well. I have to implement a receive method that is void returning and takes in that message type. And here's what the implementation of that receive method looked like in the case of converting ASCII to text. So I get my message off the message bus. I do some char array magic and stash that in my local hex text. Probably should have named that something else. Property, which then gets bound to the view and the view. The one thing that's a little bit different here is you'll notice I've overridden the loaded method, because in addition to implementing observable recipient and being able to deal with messages, you have to tell the messenger when you're ready by setting is active to true. So you can kind of subscribe for messages when you want, and you can turn it off too when you want. So my base view model for this guy, and this is the sort of the inverse of converting to, ASCII to hex. He looks very similar. He sets his active to true, sends a different message, a convert ASCII to hex instead of a convert hex to ASCII. But he sends it to the messenger, and then whoever receives that picks that up, and then he receives these requests to convert hex to ASCII. And that's what that code does here. And the beautiful thing about having this all in my view models is now I can have tests for it for all the possible permutations of hex and ASCII, and I can handle stuff that's not ASCII. I can handle empty string, and I can write tests around all of that. And I don't even have to really know about how the commanding works. I can just call receive with an example message of whatever I want. So that's a way to have communication between a bunch of different components on screen. And also, it isn't a one-to-one correlation. I could have 5 components that are listening for convert ASCII to hex message, and they would all get a copy of it, and they can all act on it and display cool stuff on a dashboard. So it isn't just a simple point-to-point messaging. It is a multicast delegate style message. And I'm not using any Blazor resources to do that. It's all happening in the MVVM toolkit on the client. So let's take it one level greater and see about adding validation rules to an object and wiring up like an edit form to it. Because unfortunately, that is my day job, is data over text boxes. And incidentally, this is where looking through the changelog for the new version of the toolkit that just released last night, this is where a lot of the changes have been focused. Because there's kind of some knuckle-headed things that I have to do here. So I've created a new model type. We want to get contact information because my wife says I need more friends. And we need to know their name, phone number, that kind of thing. And so I'm using just plain old data annotations attributes here to do our validation. There's yet another class that's available in MVVM that provides this observable validator pattern. And what this does, it provides an overload for the set property method that says, okay, I want to set this property's value, and also I want you to validate that it's good data before you do it. And then it provides some other things to us, like you could say validate all the properties on the object, but unfortunately that's a protected method. So I've redirected it to be a public method here so that I can call it in my view model. 10 fingers. Okay, 10 minutes left. So you'll notice I'm not using any of the cool code gen here. I'm actually using like plain old backing fields with properties. That is a thing I think they fixed in the latest version of the MVVM toolkit. The reason why I'm doing that is that if I put these attributes on this private property or private field, they wouldn't get transferred forward in the generated code to be on the property, and then none of my validation. So it's kind of a bummer, but it looks like it's no longer a bummer now. So we've added yet another page for called form, because I'm not very creative. And this has got a Blazor edit form on it. And I'm telling it that the model is the ViewModel's contact property, which is that contact info record or class that we were just looking at. And you'll notice there's no like regular data annotation summary here or any of that stuff. And I'm not calling validate on the built-in, because you can do data annotations validation in Blazor natively. But that means that then now data validation is a concern of your view and not of your view model. Your view model won't have any idea if data is valid or not unless you give it a reference to that view, which is bad and makes it untestable, because now you've got to build that up in your testing to be able to test your view model. So instead, I've created my own really poorly implemented validation summary for data validation errors, and this is using some more convenience methods given to us from the MVVM toolkit. The main one here is this has errors property on my view model object in this case, and then get errors, which returns to me a enumerable of strings or enumerable of validation results, I guess. Yeah, and so that's what I'm looping through to show validation errors. The reason why there is a code block on this is that when there are errors in the MVVM validations library, it raises a different event called errors changed. Because the properties are validating themselves whenever they're set, there isn't a need for me to call validate at the very end. They get validated when they get set. And so then when they find problems, they raise this errors changed event. And so all I'm doing is catching that and telling my summary, re-render yourself, because there's new errors that you don't know about yet. So what does the view model actually look like for the form? This guy is pretty simple. He's just extending our regular view model base. He doesn't actually need to know much about the validation stuff. Now, where he starts to care about it is in the save command. When somebody clicks the submit button on my view, it sends a save command to the view model. And in handling that command, I want to make sure one last time that everything is valid. And then if it has errors, I want to write out some stuff to the console, because why not? And if it doesn't have errors, we'll write out a happier message to the console, because I didn't want to implement a backend API for this purpose yet. So let's look at how this all works. So if you remember from 5 minutes ago, our email has got both the required attribute and the email address attribute. So that means it can't be null, and it actually has to parse to a valid email address. And now you can see, just by changing focus, because that errors changed event was raised on my view model, and or inside my summary object, or summary control, that summary then said, oh, I need to re-render and show these new error messages. Same case with the phone number. Obviously, names, it's a lot less picky about, because any string is a name. And it's a little bit subtle because of the Bootstrap styling that comes out of the box, but this save button is actually disabled now because the model is no longer valid. So if I clear it, you can see it gets a little bit darker, and I get the pointy finger behavior because it's valid. But because those are all required, I can't actually submit with that on the back end. Anyway, need to get close to the end here. let's see, tests for this. I did not write tests for this because it's just attributes. And I wrote my own validation summary, which is horrible. But the idea is that you don't really want to mix your Blazor data annotations validation with your MVVM data annotations validation. Boy, those are long term. Because if you do, now your MVVM stuff has to know about those view classes. And it's going to make your stuff a lot harder to test and a lot more fragile. And you might end up having validation rules in 2 spots, which makes it easy to get them out of whack. Questions? I know I blasted through a lot there. It's kind of on purpose because I tend to do code-rich and slide-poor talks. But for further introspection, all this stuff is up on GitHub. There's some links inside there to both the MVVM Toolkit source and the documentation for it, which is pretty good. There's also some samples on the MVVM Toolkit page. None of them are for Blazor yet. That's one of the biggest issues that's in their repo. And in an effort to coax them to do something about it, I replied to one of those issues saying, hey, I'm doing a talk on this. It'd be really cool if you guys had like an official sample. Here's my crappy one. And as ever, I'm Kelly. That's where I live on the internet and where I work. Questions?
Is there ever a case where you need to sort of Blazor over?
The question was, is there a case where I use regular Blazor WebAssembly over WebAssembly with, or Blazor WebAssembly with the Community Toolkit? When I have to. There's a couple clients that I've worked with that have kind of rolled their own MVVM pattern, and it's pretty gnarly because they've got stuff like async method calls and property setters, and you know, it makes for a weird class of bugs. I would much rather use an MVVM framework made by people smarter than me. So, you know, while it's not my preference, I think there still is a valid use case for that if somebody has got some existing legacy code that they want to bring into Blazor first, and then go through and fix all the bad MVVM decisions they've made. So yeah, I think there is a use case for plain old Blazor. There was one other question over here. Guess not. That it? Oh, geez.
I cut to right a little bit. It seems like the main purpose of the MVVM toolkit is to steer you away from some of the bad patterns that inhabit that.
Yeah, no, I think that would have been a good number 5 to this slide.
Stepford, I think with Blazor is that the same with the Blazor has. There are kind of all kinds of trapper doors that you can fall through. If you're not super duper strict, you can get yourself into a wedge. But it seems like this using toolkit at least guarded a little bit.
Yeah, well, and it's to provide a lot of useful stuff that is boilerplate in an MVVM app, and so that you don't have to write it or maintain it. You can rely on Microsoft to hopefully do a better job of that than at least I can. Anyway.
That you're referring to, does it have something where business to discuss there any way once they're played, or they gone if new component all of a sudden shows up that you created, dynamically can you get the last box.
So the question was, is the messaging in MVVM Toolkit persistent or not? I think is what you're asking, or durable. And it's really not, because it only ever lives in memory inside of the runtime. There is, by default, the usage is a weak reference, so that the GC can actually clean up those messages when it wants to. You can change that to use a strong reference, which means you can, while you're processing a message, you can hold on to a reference of it and it won't get cleaned up. So if you do bad things and stick it somewhere, you could get it back. You couldn't necessarily send it again, except by manually sending it again. You couldn't like replay it. Anyway, so that is all my time. Thank you very much. We have a 10-minute break